Right on. Well, thank you so much for doing this today. I really appreciate you being on the show because I know that for all of us, we're juggling schedules. And the very first thing that I like to do is just say a quick thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. So I appreciate it. And I'm flattered that you asked me to be on.
Well, that means a lot because anybody who's podcasted knows that it is a bit of a grind and that without guests, when it comes to building an awesome interview show, it wouldn't be as good as it is. So, yeah, I really appreciate it. I would love to ask you a question that ties in the fact that I have seen that you are very multi passionate. A lot of talk on the internet right now on social media is a debate between being multi passionate and being focused. This idea of picking one thing versus doing a whole bunch of things. And I'm sure we'll get into the nitty gritty of that. We could probably talk about it for hours. But kind of a unique question that I would love to know, given that you do so many things and have such a varied background, is if you were to do some new business, if we gave your mind permission to just wander and create something right now at the beginning of this show, what do you think is something new that you would build that you're not already working on?
To add to my laundry list of things that I'm working on is, I think a new business. Let me think about this for a second. But I believe that, I'll say that I really enjoy working with people. I've found that sometimes doing your own thing, sitting in a cave, trying to figure things out, has always, it's been difficult. I think in the past, and so I tend to think about who can I work with on something that maybe we have an overlapping interest in. And I think I'm going to just take a second here to think about this, if that's all right.
Of course, it's all right. I will try not to talk too much during because that could just be distracting. But maybe this is an embedded lesson for podcasters and broadcasters and journalists that sometimes silence says a lot.
Well, I think the difficulty in my answer is because I'm doing a number of contrasting things. I'm building things by myself. I'm also building with people. I've built with two people. I'm building with something with three others right now. And so I think if you asked me this 2 years ago, I probably would have had a better answer. One of the things that I've found a little bit more interesting recently is, I think it's a little bit cliche right now, but boring businesses, finding something that leans into a skill set that you have, but maybe doesn't seem that exciting. So for instance, I'm a designer. For much of my career, I've held other designers on a pedestal. I've compared myself to other designers, like how can I get better at my craft in comparison to others? And it really doesn't matter. I wasted a lot of time thinking about that. I think I was scared to attempt something boring because I always had to make sure it looked great. I always had to have the perfect packaging. And so I'd probably pick something along the lines of a boring content business that utilized my design skills in some way. And it might be something around art. So maybe it's a product-based e-com business. I'm not doing any e-com right now. So maybe it's an e-com business around art supplies for beginner or intermediate artists. I think something there doesn't sound like that appealing, but it's actually kind of interesting from a perspective of how can I apply design? How can I apply business thinking and content around something that's a little bit boring, but actually could be kind of an interesting long play. So these days, I'm thinking about not what's most shiny, but like what is actually something I can see myself doing for a long time.
And there's something about e-commerce that's just fun. And I don't know if it's the shiny object stuff when we see people posting pictures of them standing in their warehouse after they're, 7 years down the road succeeding, and they're showing pictures of the trucks that are pulling out of the parking lot with all their products on it. And I always feel like it would be cool to turn the Shopify store on again myself. I did some hoodie making just to see what it was like to do some merch and e-commerce and see what it was like to build a Shopify store, mostly because I support a lot of people in a whole bunch of different businesses. And so it's hard to talk about Shopify as a company or as a concept if you haven't built a Shopify store. So I did it for that purpose. And ever since then, I've thought similarly, somewhere down the road, if I'm still around, God willing, I will have something in the e-commerce world too. So that's interesting that that's an area that you're not already operating in. I was wondering if you were going to make me dig for some of the details, but the fact you went there with the actual, what the product was, I think was really cool. And I think that would do pretty well. So maybe we will actually see it, even though it was hypothetical.
Yeah, I mean, there's a part of like the physical product that it was really appealing, right? And maybe it starts out as a drop shipped item. I know everybody's doing this, so probably wouldn't work out that well. But I think a company that does this really great is Studio Neat. I think it's studioneat.com, but they create their own pens, their own pencils. They create a number of different hardware items that is just so unique and interesting. And so I think maybe that desire will always be there. It sounds really complicated to do, and I don't even know the first thing to do or to start. But you're right. It is, there's some selfish interest in seeing the things that you could dream of come to life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And so you mentioned that you put other designers on a pedestal. When you say that, are we talking in general terms, or are there people that we can give shout outs to, recognizing that you're trying not to put them on a pedestal per se, but when you were looking up to other designers, who were those people?
Oh yeah. So Cameron Mull, it was as a designer. Koi Vin is another designer. And the reason why I really enjoyed these people is not that they were better designers than me, but they were more outspoken. They had active blogs. They were attending conferences, having speaking gigs. They were just a little bit more vocal about their opinions on design. And I think I felt like I wasn't, and I was timid and scared to share those thoughts. And I looked at people when I was single, they had families. Like Koi Vin, I think, has 3 kids. Cameron Mull has 5, and they're prolific people. And so this idea that I had in my mind that it almost seemed like I wasn't doing enough because I had no strings, I had no family at the time, really made me look up to them, maybe a little bit intimidated by them. But they are seeming, I don't know them personally, but they were mentors of mine, essentially, virtually, being able to follow their work, see how they did things, look at their craft, hear them talk about it. So I took a lot from them, and I owe a lot of my career to them because I am self-taught myself.
I don't know the quote for sure offhand, but maybe I do, like that comparison is the thief of joy, something to that effect. And when I hear you sharing about comparing to them, but not wanting to put them on a pedestal and kind of go build your own brand your way, what were some things that you did to be able to not compare in a negative way, but take the mentorship from them?
Well, I don't think that this happened till later, this shift in my mindset. I think I was always sort of being inspired or influenced by them without really acknowledging everything I just said now. That I felt differently at the time. I think looking back on it now, I was inspired by their writing. They were both writers. And you didn't really see too many designers who wrote an active blog, or, there was just, it felt like there was maybe a couple of dozen of these people. And later, and this is actually 2020, is when I started writing more consistently. I took a rite of passage, but it allowed me to feel more capable in sharing my ideas and appreciate what I was learning or had learned from them in the past. It was really about the confidence that they had in their own voice to share their opinions through their writing. And that's what separated them from many other designers that I followed at the time. And so looking back, that's a key skill I think most people should have. It's something I do consistently now, but I wish I had started that sooner in my career.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I feel like no matter what we're trying to do early on in our journey, we're going to look at people and aspire somewhat to be like them. Or I guess I wrote a pretty decent post recently about the idea of having to steal at first to find our own voice eventually. And it's funny that concept for me was first kind of crystallized with the big cover of Austin Kleon's book, Steal Like an Artist. And that's because I don't come from a design background at all. I have a friend who designs hockey skates and snowboards and that kind of stuff. And aside from that, I don't have a big design background. I think of Austin Kleon's work and how he has really unique books. But when you use the term designer, for people who are tuning in and are like, okay, what exactly does that mean? Because it's such a broad term. I haven't looked up those two people you referenced yet, but when you say they are both designers, what do you mean?
Simply, they're web designers. The lingo has changed over the years, but they've done a lot of web design. They've done a lot of product design, which are things like, digital product design, at least, is mobile apps, web apps, things like that. User interface, maybe what's known now as UI, UX kind of design. So those are the things that I was interested in. I was building mobile apps, when the iPhone came out, and really immersing myself in software.
This is kind of a perfect step into what in your life led you to getting into design.
Yeah, I don't have a traditional, I dropped out of college, but I grew up in a household that was very creative. My dad was a fine artist. He is probably the most talented artist I know. And truthfully, he's old school. He could frost a wedding cake. He can do calligraphy. For Easter, we would, if you dipped an Easter egg in paint, basically there's another version of this. It's called Ukrainian Easter egg design. And so you take wax over a candle and you design or draw lines around an egg and dip it, and it becomes this kind of multicolored egg that's beautiful, shown in like a display case at art stores. He could do anything. He built our house. He would draw little animal kind of illustrations in our ceiling paint, and so I just felt surrounded by creativity. I didn't know what I wanted to use or output that in. I started drawing a lot. And so I was an artist as a kid. And then my dad was a graphic designer as well. I get out of college, and I'm not sure really, or I'm sorry, I get out of high school. I'm not really sure what I want to do. And I'm thinking maybe design, but I didn't really want to do what my dad did. And there was a person at our church who did web design, and he was more of a programmer than a designer. But I called him up one day and I said, "Hey, I'm curious about this web design thing. I'm not really learning any of this at school. Can I help you out? Can I work with you in some way?" And he was so generous, and he was, I worked as an apprentice essentially. And so I worked with him for 2 years and learned a little bit about how to apply design to the web. And so design for me, at least web design, started to bring all of the things I was interested in as a kid, art, graphic design, posters, and then apply that to the web in some way. I kind of got into it right away. I was hooked immediately. I had also tried shooting or photographing weddings, and this long process of like dealing with a client over a year or two, getting prints, it was just a long process. And web design, you design something, get it, upload it immediately, and you're done. And so it was this instant gratification, something I could work on a laptop. I didn't need any overhead. And all of these things just kind of combined to really just embolden my love for design and the internet, essentially. So that's kind of where it started. And yeah, I just started working with clients on a freelance basis from there on and just try to build a portfolio.
For curiosity's sake, how many weddings and or shoots did you do?
I did over 2 years, and more specifically like 2 summers and two falls. I shot about a dozen weddings total. And just hustled. it was, weddings are one of those things where you do one and then everybody tells their friends. So you can, if you want to earn some money over a summer gig, like shoot weddings, because word spreads quickly, especially if you're cheap, like I was. And yeah, so that took off, but I was so consumed with the logistics of everything and meeting the bride a year in advance and trying to set everything up, and then the pressure of not screwing up. It was just a lot of pressure. And so I was not someone who could deal with that well.
Well, you read my mind because you said that everyone will tell their friends, and I was thinking, yeah, if you do a good job. But what I was also going to ask was, what was it like the first time? How much pressure did you feel trying to make sure you didn't miss any shots?
Yeah, I think so. This kind of goes back to maybe my philosophy on learning and something we'll talk about. But I, like Austin Kleon, you steal or you copy. My first two weddings I did with a friend who was already shooting weddings, and so I was an apprentice for web design. I was an apprentice for wedding photography, and I just kind of learned how to really just be a person that people can relate to, can trust. And then there's the technical side of things of actually doing the job. But like working with my friend was able to give me some experience and think about how to handle tough situations, right? When not everybody's there on time, or when someone looks off in a shot, how to get everybody back together and redo the shot. And just a lot of things that, there's a lot of little situations that really can build up and create a lot of anxiety. And working with a photographer for the first two really helped me through some of that.
I've been in a lot of wedding parties, and I got married. I have a lot of friends that are or were professional photographers and also hung up the cameras. And right now I'm mentoring, I guess, maybe 2 or 3 people who coincidentally, and this is why I love this show as a side note. I know I'm super biased, but like I didn't really think that we'd necessarily be talking about photography at this point, 15 minutes in. But it's awesome because I have the audience in mind, and a lot of people who tune into the show are those who are really like thinking of different types of creative fields. And photography isn't often talked about one, maybe because we all have cameras in our pockets, or it's, one of those things that we see pictures when we're growing up. I'm not exactly sure why it is, but it often comes up as like, oh, maybe I can shoot weddings.
Yeah.
And I'm always like, yeah, maybe. Also, here are some of the things to keep in mind as you're starting. And this literally just came up a couple weeks ago for me with a teenager who was thinking of these ideas. And so that's why it was really interesting to have that come up.
I think one of the keys to learning anything is just ask someone who's doing it already and see if you can help them out. It could be anything. I worked as an assistant to a commercial photographer to kind of, maybe that's the route I wanted to take with photography is actually shooting, doing commercial shoots. So I worked with him for a while and learned how to use Photoshop on shoots. And so I think just seeking out mentors or people in your space who are already doing it, they would love your help. You can go out and ask anybody, and most people would be flattered, or at least recommend you to someone else. Expect to do it for free or for very cheap, the first couple of times, but you're going to learn so much. So that's just a hack to kind of like explore an interest or curiosity of yours.
Was going to ask, when you mentioned the idea of being an apprentice to that friend of yours from church, what your stance on the idea of paid versus unpaid work is, because our local college just changed their policy where they don't do free co-op positions anymore. And I thought that was the most ridiculous decision ever. I think it's kind of short-term thinking, but it sounds like you just answered your stance on it.
Listen, I don't think there's one right answer to that question. I think it's situation based. So for me, working with my friend for web design, I started out free. Then it became a paid position pretty quickly because I could offer I could help him out, right, at a business level. And he wanted me to stick around a little bit too. So there was that situation changed a little bit. I think if we're serious about our commitment to something, I am absolutely going to do free work. I do free work now, even like long into my career, I did I essentially did a free workshop and did some free design for a friend. And so I think it kind of like helped me because I wanted to figure out like how can I teach something, like in a beginner with a beginner's mindset. And it's hard to do that when you're being paid for something because as soon as a dollar is exchanged, there's an expectation of value that you should be giving. And so my philosophy typically is full rate or free. And so I will, even with friends, I will say, here's my rate. You can pay me that. And I will put you in line with all my other clients. Or I can do it for free and you'll get it when you get it. And so I tend to approach things not in a middle ground area because people want discounts. I think that it diminishes the value I give. The expectation is still that they want something 100% of my time and effort, even at a discount. So I think that that's an area I try not to approach, but free or full rate is my philosophy.
I really like that. I don't know that I've even heard it stated that succinct and simply before, but to me, it makes a ton of sense. I'm by no means far along my creative journey as someone might consider like successful, but to me, I never expect to end up not doing things for free, where it's like, no, my time's worth money. And certainly there are those people out there. One of the things that you've shared is like 3, maybe 4 examples of working with other people. And I know that another thing that's kind of all the rage these days is solopreneurship. You mentioned that it often does get kind of lonely building businesses, but how do you decide when to work with people and when to kind of keep it your own thing?
I often think of my friend, Paul Millard, who's a self-published author. He reached out to me early on in my kind of solopreneur journey, and gave me words of encouragement even before I really had those words before I felt them, I guess I would say. I think that, working with others, the reason why I choose to do that is because it's fun, just simply. Like if I feel like I'm going to have, let's say you and I are, we're friends now, we don't know each other well, but if we felt a common interest in something and we think it might be fun to work on something together, I think it might be worthwhile just exploring that a little bit. I think the business stuff can work itself out. I think making sure it's beneficial for both parties, usually you can figure that out. And I think you should figure that out. But just from a pure, will we have fun doing this together is really kind of my barometer of like whether I want to work with someone or not. I'm not going to force it. There's no reason to force a collaboration. But for example, my friend Salman and I did a drawing course together, and it did okay. I mean, maybe $7,000-8,000, not a lot of money, but just something that we both wanted to explore how to teach drawing. And we decided to work together and spend a couple of months just shooting some videos, randomly. And it was fun, like it wasn't a lucrative thing, but it was really fun to do. I learned a lot. I took some of those skills about writing and the copywriting and shooting video and editing. And I can use those for future courses or future products. So I look at it as a net win in doing stuff like that.
The topic of collaboration does come up on this show a lot. I think it comes up on every podcast, but on most podcasts and certainly the show, it tends to like stop after a question because I feel like the definition is fairly simple. Yes, I like to work with people because I don't only like to work alone. Makes sense. Okay, let's move on. But I'd like to stay here for a second because I feel like those who have trouble collaborating or working with others could really benefit from the types of things that you're talking about. Like a lot of times online, especially, and within collaborations, it's like, no, come to me once your audience is also 100K, or we can work together once you're also a millionaire. People feel like they're putting someone on maybe too much, or sharing their audience when they're protective of it. Like that's definitely the norm if you don't know that already. And obviously you are open to exploring other possibilities.
Yeah, I think that there's like, what do you bring to the table? I think there's an element there of how is this going to be a win-win for each person. This is not necessarily a business deal in terms of who comes out with more money at the end of it. But it's like, how can we benefit each other? So for instance, if you have a bigger audience, if we're working together, you have a bigger audience than I do, you're bringing more to the table. So I may need to do more to, whether it's in production, maybe it's in marketing, and what am I going to be able to do to match that in other ways? And so I think that expectation should probably be there, just from the outset. And if I had a bigger audience and I had more distribution and marketing power, I'd expect that, okay, you're going to do something on your end that's a bit above and beyond. So I think that would be my approach, and I do approach that. For instance, I worked with a creator, Kay He, who's just become a really great friend, who has got a much bigger audience than I do. But I've done some collaboration work where I did a workshop with him, and we redesigned his podcast start, and he just had to show up and kind of let me help him, and so I think there's ways to make it a win-win, because he's getting something out of it, that he can use in design. And we both have become friends, but he had the distribution. So I think there's a number of ways to kind of tackle that, but you have to be willing, if you're at the lower end of that, to be able to say, I've got to do more than the next person if I don't have that same audience or the same, capital, to invest in it.
Makes complete sense. And I love that, philosophically speaking, you're giving me some permission, it feels like, to do some of the things that I want to do. And just for a quick example, at least 3 guests who have much larger audiences than I, like Miriam's art, for example. I think she has like a few million followers on TikTok or something. She's like, oh, we should do something someday. And we talked like, oh, maybe we could write a children's book together. Like I've always wanted to make a children's book about adoption, with my daughter in mind and things like this. But I've often been like, I have 4,000 followers on Twitter. That's about the extent of it. Like, and I've, we're in contact, those kinds of things, but I haven't been like, oh, we should do that now. I think there's a piece of my mind that's been like, we will be doing that in the future. Voiceover superhero is another one. We've often talked about doing an audio book on the Calm app for kids. Same kind of thing, I think, in my mind, and you're just forcing me into some self-reflection right now. I feel like in my mind, I've been thinking those things will happen later, but maybe there's no reason to not have them start sooner, which is probably a lesson for anyone listening too.
I think you should. This is not a podcast about, me telling you what to do, because I don't know most of the things that I'm doing anyways. But I think that you're in a position where she's expressed interest, and you could say like, hey, here's an idea. I've thought it through. Here's kind of like the whole scope of it. Here's your involvement. So if you did all the legwork and kind of showed up prepared and said, hey, here's a really great idea that I think we both could work on and collaborate on, I think it's really up to you to do that, to kind of pitch that to her and sell her on that. But yeah, you should definitely take advantage of that. Absolutely. I think more people are willing to collaborate than you might think, but it does take some effort.
And it's definitely my favorite thing. What's funny right now is there's a guest coming up. This is a complete side note in my ADHD brain, but a guest coming up named Michael Landsberg, who was the host of Off the Record here in Canada, a sports program. He's a journalist, and he's famous for one of his last interviews was with Conor McGregor, when the first thing Conor McGregor said to him was, "This is not a therapy session." And I'm looking forward to talking to him about that, because he has shared openly that he was having panic attacks leading into that interview.
Wow.
And how it was one of the worst interviews he feels he ever did. And he's open about talking about it now in recovery and stuff. And in any case, I know this is not a therapy session, but the stuff that you're sharing right now is really actually personally helpful in a way that hasn't been on this show in quite some time. So thank you. We're on a really good wavelength, because I was going to ask if you had any advice for people about how they should go about reaching out to people. Would you build on what you kind of just said at all?
Yeah, I think, again, there's not one right way, and that maybe is contrary to what people post on X seem to say. I think showing a genuine interest in the things that they do, and so showing up in their feeds, showing up. I think this has been mentioned a lot before, but really just commenting, in and involving yourself in conversations with them, expressing your interest around the ideas and the topics that they think about. Everybody loves that. Everybody loves flattery. You want to work with me, the best thing to do is just to show up in my own tweets, or somewhere where I'm showing up publicly and just engage, right? I think that's probably the easiest way versus a cold DM or a cold email. That's a little bit tougher because there's just no context there. You might not, if I've never heard of you before, how are you going to stand out, right? So I think just having some preliminary conversation and giving it maybe even weeks or months like ahead of time of just, hey, I'm interested in working with this person. I don't know if that's ever going to happen, but I really do like what they have to say. And so I'm going to spend some time like reaching out to them, commenting on their stuff and showing an interest. So that's probably the best way because this stuff needs some warm up time. It's marketing. It's like a lead funnel. Like you need to like warm people up to let you know who you are and show up again and again. So
a good micro example of that is this exact relationship that you and I now have because of this episode, because of a conversation on X. And I know you have a growth mindset because you said X, and most people in the last 10 episodes have said Twitter/X. And you're the first person, I think, to just leave it as simple as it's supposed to be now. But a lot of times I'm asked, how do you get guests on your podcast? How are you able to book guests and those kinds of things? Can you make like, and I probably should at least do one issue of the newsletter or something. Like, I'm like, it's not really a course, I don't think, to teach someone how to get guests, because I'm like, I don't know. It's just, we're just always being creative humans that like working together. And then all of a sudden, I do get some inbound, like today UPS dropped a book off from an author, and it's like, okay, maybe they'll come on the show, but also maybe they won't. That kind of traditional like publicists reaching out stuff is less interesting to me. Yeah,
but what a compliment too,
For sure.
And I think you're right. I missed the biggest thing. Start a podcast. That's being able to get people onto a show. And I think your point about how do you book guests, I think comes from someone who's never done it before or asked someone, because I don't know what your hit rate is, but we just, for one of my companies, we're kind of going through a list of a couple hundred potential game developers to interview. And we're having like a 30% like yes rate, conversion rate. And so I think it's more than likely that people will say yes to a podcast because it's flattering. You want to talk to me and hear my stories? Sure, I'll come on, like that's more people than not will want to do that. So I think reaching out, asking to be on a podcast is such a great way to build a relationship.
Yeah, and definitely flattering, and definitely I would never want to mistake I'm very grateful for inbound. I think the point that I wanted to just clarify was that when it's inbound from artists or authors or creators who don't even know that the people working for them are reaching out, and that person could care less who they're talking to, or that more was what I wanted to say was that I almost all of a sudden, without reaching out too much cold to too many people, have a lot of great people like yourself. Like, I can't keep up anymore. And so that for
Yeah.
sure is something that I'm really grateful for and appreciative of. And so when people are trying to start a show, I think I can help them really quickly. It sounds like you guys are doing it quite well and effectively. I don't know when you asked what the hit rate would be, but you just gave me a to-do list item because I'm a bit curious.
Yeah.
I'll ask first though, would you consider that statistic as you reach out and hear back, yes or no? Or would you include not hearing back in the sort of misses?
Yeah, these are only people who have responded. So yeah, the rest, either we haven't built a relationship yet, maybe it went to spam for a number of reasons, they just don't want to. But I think I was expecting 10%, and I think it's been much. So 1 out of 10, and we're getting 3 out of 10 to respond. And then we've already booked 7 or 8, and we haven't even launched our show yet. We're still kind of like just doing interviews and getting things ready. So I just find it that people don't have a lot of opportunity to share their story. Like even people who do podcasts a lot, it's not like they're doing it every day, for the most part. So, I mean, I'm doing podcasts like I feel often, but it's only a couple times a month. And so like, it's not that much. And so I think people coming in and saying, I want to hear your story. It's such a nice thing to hear. So yeah, just going back to partnerships, collaboration. Yes. Start a podcast.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I've tweeted out or posted on my stories, like everyone should have a podcast. I also include in that. And I was helping someone just a couple days ago with this too, because he wanted to start a show and he was racking his brain about how to get guests and who to interview and all this. And I said, did it cross your mind to start a solo show? And like his eyes glazed over. He had literally never thought of it. And I think this goes to speak to the things that where some of us become experts and we don't even really realize that we've become a little bit, because it shocked me that when he says podcast, he only means interview show. But I do remember exactly what that felt like, because that was the genesis of this show. And it took John Lee Dumas and David Meltzer 2 years to talk me into publishing solo episodes. But because I had podcasts in my mind, it was like, I'm interviewing people. Yeah. That's a whole other topic. But when you talk about being a guest, I think that's just an important thing too, is that when you're not editing and not uploading, I think there is a big benefit to that. And so Buster Shear, I know, who was the very first episode of this show, he did a thing a few years back where he wanted to try and do one a day. Like he just went crazy, right? He was like, I'm just going to guest.
Yeah, wow.
It is crazy, but it's 60 minutes of his day. And in terms of kind of free marketing, being able to be put on the spot and answer questions he maybe wasn't prepared for, just practicing all the skills of communication. Like he felt that would be like an understatement to say that would be a good investment of his time. So that was cool.
That you brought up a great idea too, that I hadn't really thought of till now, but like as a guest, if you're someone who's looking to collaborate, like you should probably be reaching out. I know this requires a little bit of confidence in what you want to say, but reaching out to especially newer shows potentially that don't have a high, or a large enough audience yet, they're probably just looking to have people on. And so I think even reaching out, cold DMing podcasters to see if you can go on their show could be really interesting way to do this thing well as well.
It's another example of where I'm excited to have my category a little more figured out, my story a little more dialed in, because as podcasters who are a little bit further along in their journey, like Paul's a great example. You brought up Paul. Danny Miranda's coming on the show on Monday. All of us have to be a little, it's not that we want to be picky, it's that we have to be, because there are so many opportunities. And so when people are a little more dialed in terms of what do they do, what value can they bring my audience, I think is really the lens that most good podcasters would be looking at it through. I'm so excited for that, because once I have it a little more figured out, I am someone who I think I'm an introvert by trade, but when it comes to podcasting, I can really I could probably do what Buster did and be like, okay, at least on weekdays, I'll go on one a day or something for a little sprint. And I'm looking forward to doing that as a guest. And I've done very little of it unless someone reaches out so far.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing those, because I think it's a great way to hone your own story and the things that you enjoy talking about. And it's like writing, getting that feedback loop is really important. And I think as a guest too, it's probably just as important, to know what resonates with you and your audience.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that, because another thing that happens, I get inbound a lot of people saying we'll help you write your first book, and some people want me to pay them $36,000, and some people want me to pay them 20 grand, and some people just want to coach me one-on-one. And then I've always been, no, I'm good, no, I'm good, no, I'm good. But recently I had a guest on, and we got talking about it, because that's what his whole business does, is help people write a book. And on one hand, it's like, well, it's so easy to just make your own Amazon published book, upload it yourself. And there's that sort of DIY kind of thing that probably a lot of people would say you should just do. I'm interested in the right partnerships, kind of like you shared earlier. And even though, yes, I could write a book all on my own, not have to bug anybody, not have to pay anything, but I'm actually interested in, just at least for the first one, working with someone, documenting the process and kind of sharing that journey. But a lot of people for the last 10 years, why haven't you written a book yet, whether it's on grief or adoption or education or whatever? And I'm like, because I don't want it to be just a business card. It has to be the right story. And that's why I've kind of been holding off. One of the things that comes up when it comes to collaborating, being a business owner in so many different ways, like we talked about at the top, is productivity, I guess, to use a buzzword, but being able to balance and juggle all of this. I think just listening to the 40 some minutes of this episode so far could be overwhelming to people. How do you juggle it all?
Well, I think there's a couple things I have to admit at the beginning. So if you focus on a few things, it's inevitable that your journey is going to take a little bit longer, right? So I've come to accept the fact that me working on a few different ideas, things won't scale and grow as quickly. And that's just something I'm okay with personally. And so what I know about myself, and this is just for me, I know that I will get bored working on one thing. It's just my nature. And so I do love to embrace a few different projects, because when one sits there and the ideas aren't coming and I'm not feeling very creative about that, I can bounce to something else and shift gears. I don't think that there's any magic trick that I have to kind of do that, but I do think that I do a couple of weird things, I guess. One is when I'm designing, I'll usually have a movie playing on my other screen with kind of the volume turned down. For me, I get inspired by just colors, textures, a vibe, and so I tend to work well when I'm designing and there's something visually stimulating and from a sensory standpoint. And that just kind of puts me in the groove a little bit. And so I do a lot of designing still, even across the things that I'm working on, everything touches design in some way. Writing is probably the most difficult thing I have to do. I write a weekly newsletter. I have a couple of blogs that I have a writer for one. I do writing myself on my own site. I think writing is one of those things I have to just kind of put things away and just go to another room or take my phone out of my room. I have to kind of force these things on myself, because I otherwise, the habits of watching a movie when I'm designing might happen while I'm writing, and that's not going to work. Right. So,
right.
It's, I just think that the bouncing between activities really helps me, because I tend to get bored with something and I need to be productive in another way. And I think if I were only working on one thing and if I were bored and not doing anything else, I might actually not do anything at all, which is kind of the antithesis of what I'm trying to do.
And we all have that dark side to our nature somewhere. I fall into that category too. We're very similar in this way. I've put my personal YouTube channel on my project to-do list and taken it down like 3 or 4 times. Like, no, I need to focus on the podcast. So I can't be trying to succeed with these silly documentary style YouTube videos that I want to make.
Yeah.
And then I put it back. And today I put it back. I was like, no, like I can make a video every 3 months and not stress about the fact that Ali Abdaal is building a, $20 million YouTube channel, or, that Mr. Beast puts, $10 million into a video and they always get, hundreds of millions of views. Like, if 29 people watch it, cool. But I think I just needed to do what you had done sooner than I, is recognize like it's okay to do that so long as it's for this purpose, and you're going to realize that other things may grow slower. So I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah.
When it comes to the idea of design in general, when it comes to business, what else comes to mind? Maybe gamification. I know like gaming's important to you. I could brainstorm a whole bunch of different topics that, through my research or following your content, writing being another one, come to mind. When I post our episodes, I like to create a bullet point style blog post from our guest in each episode. If I were to ask you, like, of all of these things, the one that would make you most excited to teach right now, or something else, I don't know, it could be skateboarding, I have no idea, but of all, what would be the most exciting thing for you to teach right now?
I think at my heart, I'm a designer. I think I love to help what I do currently, but I love to help creators, entrepreneurs, small business owners make better design decisions. I think there's too much shit design out there, to be honest. And I don't think the goal is to make more designers. I think it's actually to level up the ground floor of listening to your own taste, like listening and having the confidence in the things that you love, because you can make better design decisions that way. So I really actually, of all of the things that I'm doing, I think I really love to help people become better thinkers around design and to trust themselves more.
What are the main things that you see that hold people back from being able to do that?
Well, a lot of it comes down to, just downright laziness. Some of the design tools are getting really easy to use. I think Canva is a great tool, but I think many people rely on templates too much. And so what happens is you come across something that looks trendy or kind of interesting in the moment, and then you go ahead and use that, but maybe it doesn't match your brand's aesthetic or the vibe that you want to give off. And so in 3 to 6 months, you come back and maybe your website's looking a certain way, but there's no connective tissue to your own life. And so you kind of get tired and you want to rebrand it or redesign it. And I think a lot of people, especially with their personal sites, feel this way. Every 6 months, it's like, my site's not great, I want to redesign it. I'm really inspired by people like Casey Neistat, Chantel Martin, who's an artist. Like, Chantel has got a great aesthetic. She's an artist who it's really like you can point out her art anywhere, because it's like simple. It looks like simple line art illustrations, black and white. But she does it this way. She's said this in the past. She wants it to feel approachable, so more people actually can learn to draw, because it doesn't look that complicated, right? And so she does these huge murals. But if you look at her website and you go to like all of her online presences, it looks the same. Like, she expresses herself this way and she's embodied it. She's not chasing like trendy, colors and typography options that you can find in Canva. Like, it's really her. You can feel her soul in that. Casey Neistat's kind of similar, where he does a lot of a DIY approach, right? With like a big Sharpie marker, a lot of like cutout posters, and he builds things. And he's known to be inspired by Tom Sachs, who's an artist. And it's very kind of like just hodgepodge together, right? And so when you see something of Casey's, you say, oh, that's his visual style. That's Casey, right? And I think most people maybe don't lean into that as much themselves and think about what's unique from your perspective and how can I show that to the world. So that's what I'm really passionate about. I don't know if that's like the most lucrative thing to do, but it is what I'm, most interested in pursuing.
Oh, I'm a big gratitude, you know, because of some grief and different things type person anyways. I think that the most lucrative is an interesting thing. Once we have whatever beyond our basic needs, I think basic needs is one thing. Once we do have the next level, which is like, being able to maybe go out to dinner and do whatever is it within our money dials, as Ramit talks about, I think after that, who cares? It's like, I think it's more important to do what's important and valuable to us, even if it's making music and we don't make money on it or something. So hopefully you keep doing that. Since Austin Kleon came up earlier, is he similar to Casey Neistat, would you say?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of similarities because it's such a and Austin Kleon is very into collage art, right? And so while Casey maybe doesn't do that as a medium per se, when you look at his style, it is very like cobbled together in some ways, Casey tends to use Helvetica as like a basic font for a lot of things, just big sans serif letters. Austin Kleon's a little bit more hand drawn and illustrative. And so they have a messy kind of chaotic feel. So I think that there's a lot of similarities there. But I think Austin comes at it from a, very loose hand-drawn feel, a little bit more so than Casey does, I think. But they're both great storytellers, so there's a ton of overlap.
You've described some others. What is yours?
I tell this story about visiting I'm in Los Angeles. I tell the story about visiting Los Angeles when I was 18. And I'm from Minnesota originally. So I visited friends in LA when I was 18. The first thing that we did was we went out to Manhattan Beach. And it was kind of cold. It was like a December day. And I stuck my feet in the sand and popped them up. And I didn't get in the water because it was too cold. But the sun, it was a blue sky, palm trees waving in the wind, beach sand in my toes. And I felt really connected to the earth, and I connected to this location specifically. And in my mind, I said, I'm going to probably end up here someday. Doesn't mean it's a forever place, but it's, I just felt connected to this area. So when I moved here later in life, I wanted to understand why that was. And so I took a kind of a personal challenge to draw 100 palm trees in 100 days. So I drew a palm tree every day, and I started kind of working through like the aesthetics and the visual style, like why did I feel connected to this place? I'm expressing it through palm tree drawings. And around like day 62-ish, I hit this like really moody background, single source of light hitting a palm tree, very kind of realistic palm tree, but it was not what you would think. When you think of palm trees, you think of a bright blue sunny day, but to me, it was actually this mood, like dark background. I explored that further, felt like, oh yeah, I actually do love black comedies. I love drama. I love this kind of moody lighting. And now I use those colors in my websites and everywhere else. I use typically a dark background with a off-white, like sandy beach background for my blog. I have palm trees and some of the different things that I create. And so when I sit down and design, I think about the sun, the sand, and palm trees. And I usually incorporate those in some way. And I love serif fonts, so I tend to use like a big chunky serif font. And the combination of these things are kind of unique to me, and they're my vibe. And I just love them every time I sit down to design something. I love the palm trees, put me right at ease. This bulky, chunky sans or serif font, it just makes me feel good inside, and I'm excited to design these things. So even though it doesn't need to be expressed in my clothes or everyday life, it's what I think about when I think of my style.
Are you able to explain why visual things feel good inside?
I haven't really thought about that. I guess when I think about like, if you take a trip and you go, like think about your last vacation or think about your favorite vacation. I think I'm chasing those emotional feelings that you have when you're out of your everyday life, and it's like, what do I desire? Like what feels good to me? What's my favorite food? What's my favorite location? And you kind of bring the best pieces of life, and hits you in a different way than like going through your day, right? You have these emotional connections, these senses, your the food that you tasted, the way things like hit your face, the breathe, like you're using your whole body to kind of express yourself. And I think if I were to just, right or wrong, think about it that way, it's a human connection to the the stories and experiences that we have as humans, and they hit us differently visually. And I think if a photo represents 1,000 words, I think that's so true. I think it's an immediate like way to feel versus reading something, right? It's just like a sensory hack,
Yeah, and for one, you've got me very intimidated because I'm thinking of how much of a mess my website probably is, and how much it could be much more thoughtful, to use a word, and connected to things that I care about. So maybe I need to do some reflection or take your course too. But one of the reasons why I asked that was because people ask me all the time why my favorite color is like bright pink. And I'm like, there's no left brain reason that I can think of. I don't know.
So one thing I would, if you were looking to explore this more, I would think about where does that show up for you? Like what comes to mind? Was there an experience that you had as a child? Like where pink was part of that. Putting together a mood board and going through images and looking at different colors and maybe how pink kind of comes out in that. Because what I've recognized is that your intuition that pink is a color that you love, has come up in life in other ways. And when you do like extract and start to pull, kind of like Austin Kleon, like do collage art and bring things together, I bet it would show up in a few subtle ways. And there's probably a reason why you're drawn to it. And so part of like my process is like exploring that why, and then figuring out how can we use pink? Okay, well, what if we were to pair another color with that from a design perspective? How can we make that look really great, but make you feel really great about it, right? So that every time you go to design a new page on your website, you're embracing the pink either as a primary or an accent color. You're making great design decisions that feel like you, and you're excited to update your site more often. You're excited to share it. You're not getting tired of it. Like that's the feeling I'm after, right? Is this timeless design connection. Yeah, it's very emotional.
Yeah, I know the hex code's like F00A7F. I want to put that on a hat someday. And
Love it.
080052, which is like a darker, not quite navy, but darker, like really dark blue. Those are like,
Yeah.
those I didn't go on Canva and look at like palette picker or whatever. Those have like been my two favorite colors for as long as I can remember. And I will do that as a piece of homework because I think there's a good YouTube video. But I will look into that. Do a mood board. I'll do what you just recommended because I think that'll be cool to take some time on that instead of trying to like just randomly think aloud right now. I'll definitely do that. To stick with the design thing and you being such a great teacher of it, just to make sure like if we didn't want to miss any kind of bullet points or, again, if it was, Nate's like top 7 tips or top 2 tips or top 75 tips, it doesn't matter. But that's how the blog post kind of comes to be. I think everything you just shared is already going to create a really good list for people to see at a glance. But what are some other things it maybe that you would put in curriculum for a course that you were teaching? Like what would the headings be? Things that people should keep in mind as they're designing?
I think the most important thing is to learn how to use type text. Like 95% of the web is text. You go to a YouTube video page and minus the black rectangle of the video, it's just text everywhere else, right? And on the sidebar, it's trying to get you to click other things, title of the video, like comments, it's all text. And so I think learning how to choose a font. And so the first thing is choose a font that's really flexible that you can use in a lot of different ways. That'll get you most of the way. And what I mean by that is if you go to fonts.google.com, and let's say that you want a sans serif font because they're geometric in shape, they feel more modern. So think of like the Airbnb logo right now. It's it's sans serif. It's missing those little lips on the edges of the letters. And you go type in your name in the preview box, because our favorite words are our names. Type in your name and zoom the font size up so it's like 60 points plus, and start looking at the letters and just kind of fall in love with some of them and choose your font that way. It's really hard to look at them at 12 pixels and care whether they all look the same, kind of, right? So we need to get on our hands and knees and look at them more closely. So one thing is just finding a font, but the more important thing is finding one that has 6+ weights. So if you think of like a regular font that might have a regular weight, a bold weight, an italicized weight, and that's it. It's only 3 ways you can use that font. So find one with 6+. So for instance, Roboto, not saying that that's the best font, but they have it has 20 weights, has 20 different styles: extra light, regular, thin, extra bold, bold. And so the designer has made sure that all of these work really well together. And that means that you don't need to pick more than one family if you have one that supports 6+, right? So find a font that's really flexible, kind of called like a super family font. And then you can use that for your website, your YouTube. There's going to be a bunch of different weights that you can use in different ways, and it'll all look great together because the designer made them that way. So I would just learn typography as a first thing. That'll get you most of the way. Learn how to space text on a page. A good practice exercise would be to take 8 paragraphs of text and put it on a Canva or a Figma page or somewhere and try to make it look nice. And the way that you do that is by increasing the leading between the sentences. And that is around 120 to 150%. More than you are usually accustomed to. It makes the reading experience better. Think of like a book. Think how narrow those pages are. There should be 11 to 15 words per line. So your eyes don't get tired when they're reading long sentences of text. You want to make sure that your eye can jump down really quickly. And so just some really fundamental stuff around text, I think, will improve most of the designs that you make. So it will help with your websites. It'll help with your emails. It'll help with your slide decks. It'll go a long way if you can learn how to use text. So I'll stop there, but that's kind of my number one thing to do.
That's awesome. You give a lot of power, it sounds like, to the creator. Let's say I'm starting a newsletter, I'm building a blog or a YouTube channel, whatever, and to the person going on to Google Fonts to look at them. Would you say that almost any of them could work so long as they fit into those qualifications you mentioned?
Absolutely. I think the ones that won't are just the ones that are they're hand drawn and there's only one style. It might look cool, but you can only use it one way. So I would throw that out. I would find something else. So yeah, you're right. You could choose a serif, a sans serif. I probably wouldn't do a script font because they're so light and elegant that when you size them down, they kind of break apart. It's really tough to read. But I'm kind of speaking more towards serif and sans serif fonts. You can choose most of them with a decent amount of styles, and you'll be fine. Absolutely.
Awesome. I have some homework to do. I'm looking forward to it. I know naturally on the show, there always comes a time that we have to wrap. There's so many things that would have been awesome to talk about, but it's nice just kind of seeing where things go. But when you talked about the fact that you are willing to go a little bit slower to make sure that your values aren't compromised, and you mentioned earlier Paul Millard giving you a little more confidence and kind of a boost, and trying to be supportive of you before you were supportive of yourself. A lot of people listening are wanting to start creator businesses. That's slowly become the entire vibe of this show, is just helping the creators. On the business side of things, for someone who wants to go into design or any of these creative things that you've worked on, what are some like business tips if you were to give your version of that?
Yeah, the way that I've done this, and I think it's a really kind of smart way to do it, is to start talking to people about your area of interest. So I have kind of like a philosophy around this, but the idea is that you, for free, you open up your calendar and you say, I'm good at X. So I'm good at design. I want to help anybody who has design questions. I will give a free 30-minute call to 5 people, and I will help you out in whatever way possible. And I think this can work with any skill. And you just open up, expect to do work for free for 5 people, 30 minutes, could go over, that's fine. That's going to give you feedback. And what you're looking for is, what did they find interesting? What were the questions they asked of me? So that, am I skilled enough to maybe build something from that? What you're looking for is just ideas and feedback and what resonates. And then you take that you kind of hone in on a few ideas, and then you go back, and you could go on X, you could go on Instagram, like wherever, but like just say, I'm opening up 5 spots for $50, and I will give you an hour of my time, and I can help you with this. And pick one of those ideas that you came across. And this time you're going to test if people will pay you for something and pay you for your time. And that will help you figure out, is this thing, I'll say that again. Am I giving advice that people will pay for? Am I helping people transform in some way? And that's something you want to test. Then you will have a little bit more validity around one of these ideas. Then I'd probably go to a workshop idea. And I've done all of these. So hosting a workshop, opening it up, you could charge, you could not charge. I think that's up to you. And then testing that with a larger audience. And then you're building an email list. Then you can capture emails and say, hey, I'm hosting a workshop on this idea that I helped other people with. I think it could really help you. It's an hour long. It's free. Sign up. Maybe you'll get 50 email addresses. Then you're starting to build momentum and confidence in something that you've already tested and talked with others about. And then you might have something you can build that could be a paid product, or a paid service. So you could turn that into an hourly service, a consulting service, a freelance service. You could build a recorded video or a self-paced product from that. And that will just kind of give you a little bit of momentum. And what you're doing is you're testing ideas and validating them and get that feedback loop, versus I have an idea, I'm going to just go out and build it right now and waste a bunch of time on it, and it might not sell. I would rather prefer people do the former and test out an idea.
That how-to that you just did, I think, is really, really, really powerful for people that, if people stuck around till the end, they'll get a lot of value out of that for sure. One last kind of thought on this stuff that I'd love to ask you about is, it sounds like you have a really strong entrepreneurial mindset, but I feel like a lot of people expect that art and business kind of butt up against each other. And the reason I bring this up is because the idea of creating a course, for example, or creating a bunch of courses versus like making paintings and doing the fully like creative stuff, there's a continuum there. How do you navigate the fact that as a designer, you really are an artist, but you're also getting stronger in business and building the confidence,
While selling out? Is that what you're getting at? No,
Yes.
I mean, listen, I think most creative people are, and myself included for a long time, but bad at business. They tend to think that they're, like you said, they're butting heads a little bit. I would argue that my dream would be able to do art full time. I would love to draw and write every day, but I need to think about through the lens of how can I help other people doing these skills. For instance, you could be a musician who whose goal is to get signed by a label, and tour, essentially for free and make a lot of money. But like, there's so many other ways you can apply those skill sets. You can teach guitar to kids. You can find other channels to output your interest in a creative area and make money doing it, because people want what you have. They don't know how to do it. That's what I've found with drawing, helping other people learn to draw, helping people design. Even though they're not wanting to be professional designers, I can still apply design and turn it into a business. So I think there's so many examples of this. I even have friends who have a tax firm that cater to artists, and they can't take on any new clients. And so they help musicians, they help artists think about like what can be written off, because most people don't think about this as creatives. And they're crushing it. And so I think like that intersection is really interesting when you can connect what can I do for fun, and how can I help other people with that skill set that I have? And I think more people should think about that.
That's a very powerful mic drop moment. I always ask like a few rapid fire theme questions at the end that tie the episodes together and give us a bit of a through line. But before I do, you know the nature of the show, you know the audience, and you understand all the topics we just talked about. Obviously, if we were to just wrap and drop the mic right now, would there be something that we'd be leaving out, or are there any kind of final thoughts that you have? Because who knows when we'll get to do it again.
I think one thing that I've shied away from in the past, or I've never really been able to figure out, is working with friends. But the whole theme of this, our chat, is that we're doing things that we love to do and trying to share that with others. And so even though I haven't quite figured it out, I'm doing it at the moment with a game company. And I hope to make that happen. I don't know if it will, but I think it's worth trying. I guess the lesson is it's worth trying to push on the things that you really love and the things that you really care about, because I think there's an answer in most of it. Doesn't mean every situation is going to work out, but I hope that it does. I hope that I can work with friends and make it happen.
And what's fascinating is the measurement of what does it working out amount to, and what does that mean, for curiosity's sake, because I'd love to have people check out that specific gaming work you're doing and stuff. And maybe next time that's what we'll be talking about, because it's often, really crushing it. But because you're trying to make that project work, and this is aligned with the things we've been talking about, how much time do you feel like you have to commit in order to give it a good go of building something with friends?
The one thing that we never did in the past, and I've worked with this particular group of people a couple of times, and it hasn't quite, had a happy ending in a, I guess I'll say happy ending, not in a relationship sense, because that's still intact, but maybe an outcome that we wanted that we didn't quite get. But I do think that the time spent, on something, still, you want it to kind of mean something for me monetarily, as a way to support my family. I'm spending about 10 hours a week on this particular thing. We've structured the business in a way that asks of a different amount from each person. And so the thing that we didn't do in the past was ask for things of equal value. And I think that actually kind of got us into a little bit of a mess, because we wanted everything to be really equal. And this time we're kind of asking more of certain people and less of other people based on our life commitments. Some of us have jobs. This is a part-time thing for us. So we're really trying to structure the business model around what we can and cannot put into it. And so I think this time it's different, and it's a little bit smarter in how we're approaching it.
I think that's really helpful too, and circles back a little bit to the tips on collaboration that we talked about, the idea of what value is each person bringing, what time do people have, and that kind of stuff. So that will definitely help a lot of people too. It's funny that I don't know, 25 years ago, always talked about this. idea of living on the same property with all of my closest friends before we were married, and then it's come up once we were married, and it's come up since. And I get kind of like teased, like if we're at like a pool party with 25 people, like at least once every couple of years it'll come up, remember that time that Justin wanted to start that compound? And I'm like, I still think it was a great idea. And really what I wanted to do years before Dude Perfect ever did it was like just have some kind of business where we each play a different role in it. And naturally, people would think, well, you shouldn't kind of mix friendship with business and those, get some of those opinions. Yeah. But in my belief, if you're doing things the right way, even if things don't work out, like you said, the relationship can stay intact. Who cares if the business things don't work out? But I really, really genuinely feel like it would have been the way to go. And what's so funny is I also more was talking about like, if you only have like a mansion, I was like, let's just go spend $8 million on a mansion instead of all of us going all of our separate ways and then trying to come together for a Halloween party, a Christmas party, a bunch of pool parties in the summer, like, and then go watch some football games. Like, let's just all go live at the same place.
Yeah, right.
It was an efficiency thing. You need one pool instead of 12. But yeah, I was outvoted. But I think it would have been pretty cool. Built-in babysitting, like so many
cool benefits.
Things.
Yeah. Communal living. Maybe someday.
Yeah, it's still, you never know. We'll be there as seniors.
Yeah.
We will, I guess.
Right.
That's too funny. That's good. So the theme questions, the first one is always, what's one thing that you are actively learning right now? And it doesn't need to be on brand to this kind of stuff, but what's something that you yourself are learning right now?
Spanish is one thing. My daughter goes to like a bilingual school, and she's learning Spanish and English 50-50. I'm trying to keep up with her. So Spanish is one thing, because I've been to South America a few times. I would love to spend more significant time in Mexico and South America. And so I think just being able to, like, as a family, feel comfortable living in another location would be really fun. And so that's kind of my goal there.
It's awesome. And I love asking this question of anyone, but when we're parents too, I think it has a little bit deeper of a meaning. And that's just, if you were to leave one piece of advice for the next generation, what would that be?
My dad was a freelance designer. He ended up working a full-time job for, his entire life after kind of giving up his dream of building something himself, and sacrifice for his family, but he spent a lot of time in a place that he did not enjoy. And I think, the thing I want for my kids is to learn business, early on, like how to turn, just what we talked about, but like how to turn some of the things we really find interesting in life, and not to extract the most money out of it, but to know that there's a different path in life than the traditional path. And I'm self-taught, so I think I come from a lot of experience in terms of not going a traditional formal collegiate route, but how can I show my daughter that if she enjoys a particular skill, like there's a business probably there to be made out of. So I'd love for my children to be more entrepreneurial than my parents were.
There's our collaboration possibly someday, because that is the thing that motivates me to do everything I do. And I closed the tab just to make sure I was tab focused during this, but I was writing that exact blog post. And the whole goal is to share it with teachers and like just get it everywhere I can, because the youth that I've worked with are all high school dropouts. My daughter herself is super entrepreneurial and like interested in all the modern things of YouTube and creating stuff, but the traditional school stuff, not so much. So I see that coming. She's only 10, but it's going to go quick. And like that wakes me up at night and really fuels me in terms of a question too. So I appreciate that there are a lot of people, or at least a few other people, working on tackling that subject. So thank you. And then the final one is just, if I were to give you the mic, you get to practice podcasting and ask me a question. What would a question that come to mind be?
Well, I think, where did you DM'd me? Let's start there. You reached out to me, and, I'm just because we spoke about it and, felt like maybe I had a good answer to it, but I still struggle with like insecurity around asking things of people. And so where do you get the confidence, to DM me and ask me to come on this show? I'm just curious, like, what can you tell me to help me build up my confidence a little bit?
One of the first things that comes to mind is, and I shared this as well, that Buster Shear was in the first episode of the show. That guy had millions of social media followers when he was 16. He shared in the episode that he knew he really made it when he was at a Travis Scott concert backstage DMing with New York Yankees and Drake. Like
Wow.
the kid,
Yeah.
by social media clout standards, has all the reason that someone else would to be like, no, I'm too cool for you. Yet as soon as he knew that I was starting this show, he was like, I'll be episode 1. I asked him that question, why? And him sharing that it really has no difference in his mind if we are helping 20 people or 20,000 people on that episode, that he just likes to help people, was the reason why he doesn't measure like clout and stuff when he does things like that. As you mentioned, there's probably the flattering piece too, that if somebody wants you to come on and share your stories, then that's going to be a benefit too. But I think the fact that one of the first people I asked was such a big guest who said yes, and that was episode 1, that was the first thing that paved the way to having confidence in reaching out. And so maybe that was luck. What quickly happened that also helps is there's essentially a waiting list, arguably, of like into the hundreds of people. So there's no more, it's like the playing hard to get or the relationship advice or the sales advice that if you don't actually need something, then all of a sudden you're going to be able to sell. And I used to sell I was a personal trainer, and it wasn't a sales tactic. I didn't even realize what I was doing at the time, but people would ask me to go speak at sales conferences or events. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell anyone because all I do is work. And then when somebody says, well, how much is it to work with you? I'm like, it's $5,000. And, oh, that's a little, okay, I don't care. I'm too busy. Like, it just was genuinely too busy. And then all of a sudden they're like trying to figure out how to, and looking back 20 years ago, I think that was a lesson there too, not being needy. And to make sure that this touches on what you were saying and like specific to your situation, I've never reached out to anyone because I think that they could be like a big guest. When Daniel Matte was on the show, we talked about this because his father, Gabor Matte, is like a huge idol kind of mentor of mine. And I would love to interview him. And I very transparently said to Daniel, like, of course I would love to interview your father. They co-wrote a book together though. And I thought that Daniel's part in that book was really cool. And so interviewing him was genuinely awesome. Not because I was like, oh, maybe now I'll get to interview your dad. I wouldn't have done it otherwise, it was because it was a good one. And we talked about this, and it became kind of like a little, not viral, but a popular clip from that show, was the idea of like a big get. I hear that in podcast group chats or things like that. Like, how do I get bigger guests? I've never thought like that. So maybe that was just a positive thing, because I'm not like, oh, this is a big get and you keep leveling up. I think some people think that way.
Yeah.
I've just always felt, how does this connect to my audience in terms of something that they can learn? To reference one other person, episode 3 was with David Speed, UK. He's the creator of Creative Rebels podcast, and it's a really popular podcast too. And he came on as early as episode 3, and that was his main advice, was like, just make sure that you answer your questions through, how does this help my audience? And so for me,
Right.
the why is so valuable for the audience that if it's a matter of people saying no to me, it was still well worth asking the question. And finally, when I reach out to people, not to be too woo-woo-y, but unless there was like a very genuine like interest in reaching out to you, I wouldn't have done it. And I think some people do like a Dream 100 list or a Dream 1000 list, and they reach out to everybody. I stopped doing that a long time ago because, again, naturally these things just come up more and more and more.
That's fantastic. What a great answer. Thank you.
Of course, I hope it wasn't too long-winded, but touched on some of the different things. And I was honestly having to think back a little bit too. I guess if somebody was really struggling with that question, though, at the end of the day, I would give them the also dating advice of there's so many fish in the sea. So that's less flattering, but that becomes true pretty quickly too. If somebody was really struggling with it, it's like, okay, well then interview someone else.
Yeah. 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 What I heard too was you are looking to help share their story. Like you're looking to help them in a way and your audience. And it's never the reverse. It's never really internalized in a different way. And I really like being able to see it that way will likely give me more confidence in reaching out to people because it's more about them and sharing their story with my audience. So
you're the conduit, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I have listened to some podcasts that I pretty quickly turned off because they went about it in a way that they were trying to interview people to learn only for themselves.
Yeah.
I ask 90% plus, maybe that's not fair because it depends on the episode. A lot of episodes, I ask questions that arguably the answers I know.
Yeah.
That being said, that has nothing to do with it. It's not for me. And there's a whole other thing there about interviewing, like where I think it can be tough to make sure that you are asking things that somebody driving in their car, having A, never listened to the show, B, never thought about the concept of design, are wondering, and having to put yourself in their shoes a little bit. And one last thing too that comes to mind that I think is really important that would help you too, or anyone doing an interview show, is it's really played out longitudinally now. So I have like proof of this, is when I reach out, a lot of times it's like, now is not a good time. But then 6 months later, whether they remember or I remember, or we just bump into each other again, the interview makes sense. Yeah. So I interviewed Cody Warner a couple weeks ago. We talked about doing that in 2021. When Brendan King came on the show, I had reached out to him like 10 months before that. I never followed up again, but I'd read 1 Million Followers. I read Hook Point. I liked both those books. I liked when he was public speaking and stuff. I was like, he could bring a lot of value to the audience. Yeah. And then his team reached back out like 10 months later. And with podcasting, it's like, who cares?
Yeah.
When we do it, it's going to be awesome.
Yep. No, that's a great reminder.
So, where and why people should go to support one of your Medi projects is definitely the thing that I like to leave people with before we drop the final mic.
Well, where is you can go to approachabledesign.co and I will help you make better design decisions. So I think I can help you in being more confident about the things that you create. And you can also find me on X at Kadlac at Kadlac, Kadlac. And yeah, those are great places to find me.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing the current projects grow as well as the future ones succeed, or at least you share what you've learned from them. And a lot of times on this show, people have really big audiences, big brands, have a ton of experience, and yet they remain very humble throughout an entire episode like this, and you definitely fit that category. So I just really want to say thank you so much.
Thank you, Justin. This was just really fun to do and great to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. Boom.